The upper room was warm, filled with the lingering scent of broken bread, roasted lamb, and spilled wine. But outside, the spring night air was sharp and cold, of the Last Supper and the coming agony of the garden. But the Gospel of John refuses to let the landscape remain in the background. The symmetry is chilling, just as Ahithophel's betrayal ultimately led him to hang himself. Judas will meet the exact same tragic end. Both kings cross the same dark boundary. Both kings are rejected by the city they loved. Both kings weep in the shadows of the Mount of Olives. The Kidron is the geography of betrayal. It is where the king walks when human loyalty shatters. That would already be significant enough to explain why John deliberately recorded the name of the valley. It beautifully connects Jesus to the ancient sorrow of David. But the story does not end there. As the centuries passed between David and Jesus, the kings of Judah used this deep trench for something even darker. The Valley of the Rejected King was about to become the graveyard of false gods. The physical valley did not just hold the echoes of a weeping king. Beneath the dirt and loose rocks, it held the actual, physical dust of national treason. In the centuries after David fled across the Kidron, the kings who sat on his throne repeatedly failed to remain faithful. They imported foreign gods, craving the safety and prosperity promised by the surrounding empires. They built pagan altars in the streets of Jerusalem. They even erected wooden Asherah poles and placed statues of false deities inside the very courts of the Temple of Yahweh. John 18:1 halts the narrative to record exactly where Jesus stepped. When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples. They filled the holy city with objects of false worship, seeking human control instead of trusting the God who had rescued them. But occasionally, a righteous, reforming king would rise to power. Kings like Asa, Hezekiah, and Josiah refused to tolerate the spiritual corruption. When they initiated nationwide reforms, they did not simply ask the people to turn away from the idols. They dragged the false gods out of the sacred spaces by force. Yet, they could not simply toss the pagan altars outside the city gates. The idols had to be completely eradicated, their power symbolically and physically shattered. The biblical writers deliberately record a very specific, violent sequence of events. In 2 Kings 23, King Josiah removes the Asherah pole from the temple. He takes it outside the city walls, directly down to the Kidron Valley. He sets it on fire. But burning is not enough. He beats the charred remains until they are ground into a fine powder, and then he scatters that dust over the graves in the valley. Generations earlier, King Asa did the exact same thing to an idol constructed by his own mother, chopping it down and burning it in the Kidron. When King Hezekiah commanded the priests to cleanse the temple of its filth, they carried all the ritually unclean debris out and threw it into the Kidron Valley, and crossed the Kidron Valley. Why does John name this specific ravine? The other gospel writers simply note that they went. The Kidron became the definitive symbol of idolatry removal in the biblical imagination. It was the designated incinerator for false gods. To dump an object in the Kidron was to declare it permanently cursed. It was cast out of the holy city, mixed with the graves of the dead, and left for the sudden winter floods to wash away into the barren wasteland of the Dead Sea. The Kidron was not merely a physical garbage dump. It was the mechanism of purification. Step back and look at the theological architecture of this landscape. The Kidron is the absolute boundary where false loyalties are crushed into powder. Every time an Israelite looked down into that dark ravine, they were reminded that God demands exclusive allegiance, and that every idol eventually ends up as dust in the dirt. When Jesus crosses the Kidron on the night of his betrayal, he is walking directly through the graveyard of Israel's false gods. He is stepping over the ancient, pulverized dust of crushed idols. The true king is walking through the valley, where false kings and false gods are brought to their end. But the valley was not dry on the night Jesus descended into it. It was early spring, the season of the Passover, and the water was actively moving through the rocks in the dark, out to the Mount of Olives. But John makes sure we know exactly what they walked through to get there. And on this specific night, The water flowing beneath his sandals was not just carrying the memory of ancient dust. Because of what was happening high above him on the Temple Mount, the river was carrying something far more shocking. The Kidron Valley is dark on the night of the Last Supper, but it is not silent. As Jesus and his disciples descend the steep limestone path, they can hear the water moving violently through the bottom of the ravine. During the spring, the brook usually ran heavy, with runoff from the late winter rains. But on this specific night, the eve of Passover, the water in the Kidron was not just muddy. It was red. To understand why, we have to look away from the valley floor and look up toward the Temple Mount, towering directly above them in the night sky. Passover was the most massive, chaotic, and bloody festival in the ancient biblical world. Hundreds of thousands of Jewish pilgrims crowded into Jerusalem, and every single family brought a lamb to be sacrificed. The ancient historian Josephus estimated that more than 200,000 lambs were slaughtered in the temple courts during a single Passover season. The scale of the event was physically staggering. The priests worked in exhausted, synchronized lines, catching the blood of the lambs in gold and silver bowls. The problem is not that the verse is unclear. The problem is that we read it with modern eyes, and dashing it against the base of the massive bronze altar. But with hundreds of thousands of sacrifices, where did all that blood go? The ancient Jewish traditions recorded in the Mishnah describe the hidden architecture of the temple drainage system. Beneath the great altar was a complex network of underground channels. When the sacrifices were finished, the priests would flush the stone floors of the temple courts with water to wash away the massive accumulation of blood. This dark, crimson mixture flowed down through the subterranean pipes, out beneath the eastern wall of the city, and emptied directly into the Kidron Valley. The Mishnah even notes that the flow was so heavy that local farmers would come down to the Kidron to collect this blood-enriched water, to use as fertilizer for their gardens. Now, bring that historical reality back to the Gospel of John. When Jesus steps down into the Kidron Valley, the temple drainage system is actively washing the blood of the Passover lambs down the eastern cliff. The brook running beneath his sandals is literally dyed red. He can hear it moving over the rocks. He can smell the metallic scent of it in the cold night air. The theological weight of this single, physical step is overwhelming. The blood of the temporary substitutes is flowing through the dirt, covering the sins of the nation for one more year. And right over that crimson water steps the true Lamb of God, treating the Kidron Valley as a mere geographical gap on a biblical map. We imagine a peaceful nighttime stroll over a picturesque stream. He is walking toward the cross to become the final, permanent sacrifice. The geography is screaming the theology. Jesus is literally wading through the blood of the old covenant to establish the new one. Every layer of biblical history has now collided. In this one dark ravine, the weeping, betrayed king fleeing his throne, the crushed, burned dust of false idols, the flowing blood of the Passover lambs. Jesus gathers all of these ancient, heavy realities into himself as he crosses the boundary into the shadows. The text is not just telling us how Jesus got to the garden. It is showing us exactly what it costs to save the world. But this historical pattern is not just a piece of ancient trivia meant to be admired. It is a boundary that must be crossed. If the Kidron is the biblical geography of rejection, idol crushing, and sacrifice, it is not merely a place Jesus visited in the past. It is a place he eventually requires his followers to enter. The history of this dark ravine forces us to ask a deeply personal question about the boundaries in our own lives. The Kidron Valley still exists today as a deep physical ravine just outside the walls of Jerusalem. But in the biblical imagination, it is not merely a place on a map. It is a spiritual geography. And if you follow Jesus long enough, but to a first-century Jewish reader, the Kidron Valley was not a place for a peaceful walk. It was the physical embodiment. Eventually, you will have to cross it yourself. There are seasons in our lives when the warmth and fellowship of the upper room vanish, and we are forced to descend into the dark, like David, and like Jesus. You may find yourself walking away from the life you knew, weeping over a profound relational fracture. The betrayal that cuts the deepest never comes from a distant enemy. It comes from someone who ate bread at your table, a trusted friend, a spouse, a spiritual mentor, a lifelong companion. When human loyalty shatters, the descent into the valley is agonizing. You enter the Kidron, the heavy, murky darkness of grief. Your posture changes. You find yourself walking with bare feet over sharp stones, mourning what was lost. When you are forced into that dark trench, the natural human instinct is to rush out of it as quickly as possible. We want to escape the valley of rejection and get back to the light. But the Kidron is not just a place of sorrow. It is the boundary of purification. Remember what the reforming kings of Judah did in this exact valley. They did not just weep there. They used it as the graveyard for their false gods. This is where the history of the ravine confronts us with a deeply personal question. What are you carrying into the dark? What hidden idols have you allowed to take root in the temple of your own heart, of rejection and death? Throughout the entire Old Testament, the Kidron Valley is never mentioned casually. We do not bow to wooden Asherah poles today. But human nature has not changed. We bow to our absolute need for control. We worship our curated public image. We build internal altars to financial security, to the approval of others, and to the comfortable outcomes we feel we deserve. When a crisis hits and you are pushed into the Kidron, the pressure does not create these idols. It reveals them, and you cannot carry them with you to the other side. The painful process of spiritual maturity is learning to do exactly what King Josiah did. You have to recognize what you have secretly been worshiping. You have to name it honestly. And then, you have to drag it out of your heart, crush it to powder, and leave it in the dirt. You must leave your false loyalties behind in the dark, trusting that the presence of God is enough. Crossing your own Kidron is the agonizing process of letting your false gods die. It is stepping over the blood of the true substitute, realizing that his sacrifice is the only thing that allows you to survive the valley of your own failures. We cannot reach the resurrection without first walking through the murky waters of rejection and leaving our idols in the dust. In the middle of the night, this journey feels incredibly lonely. When you are standing in the wreckage of a betrayed relationship, it only appears in the biblical record during moments of catastrophic royal betrayal. The violent destruction of national idols, or mourning the death of a personal kingdom you had to crush. The valley feels like a permanent graveyard. It feels like the darkness has won. But there is a final biblical promise about this specific valley that changes how we view our pain. The story of the Kidron does not end with betrayal and blood in the dark. The darkness of the Kidron Valley feels incredibly permanent. When you look at its history, a trench filled with the dust of crushed idols, the blood of slaughtered lambs, and centuries of forgotten graves, it appears to be a landscape completely defined by death. It is the ultimate boundary of exclusion, the place where broken things are thrown away and forgotten. But biblical geography is never left in ruins. The God of the Scriptures does not simply abandon the places of our deepest mourning. 600 years before Jesus crossed the Kidron, the prophet Jeremiah stood in the streets of Jerusalem. His nation was collapsing. The armies of Babylon were approaching to burn the temple to the ground. Yet, in the middle of this absolute devastation, God gave Jeremiah a vision of the distant future. He promised a day when he would establish a new covenant. He promised to rebuild the city, not just with stronger stone, and the shedding of sacrificial blood. The writers of Scripture deliberately track who crosses this valley and what is dumped into its dirt, but with a fundamentally transformed nature. And in Jeremiah 7:40, the prophet records a stunning, highly specific geographical detail about this future restoration. The whole valley, where dead bodies and ashes are thrown, and all the terraces out to the Kidron Valley on the east, as far as the corner of the Horse Gate, will be holy to the Lord. The city will never again be uprooted or demolished. Notice carefully what God chooses to emphasize. He does not say that the Kidron Valley will be filled in, bypassed, or hidden. He says that the exact valley where the dead bodies were buried, the exact valley where the ashes of the destroyed idols were dumped, will be declared holy to the Lord. In the ancient mind, this is a profound contradiction. The Kidron was the absolute definition of the unclean. It was the wasteland outside the camp. But Jeremiah's prophecy reveals that in the final redemption, the borders of God's holiness will expand so powerfully that they will absorb the boundary of death itself. The city of God will grow to encompass the graveyard, transforming the darkest ravine into sacred ground. This is the grand synthesis of the Kidron pattern. God does not just rescue his people from the dark valley, he reclaims the valley itself. When you walk through your own Kidron, when you survive the crushing betrayal, the painful surrender of your idols, the dark night of mourning that season does not remain a permanent wasteland in your life. A small group of men left the heavy stone walls of Jerusalem behind. Descending into the dark, they walked in silence. This is not ultimately a story about a dark physical ravine. It is a story about the boundaries we must cross. In the economy of God, the places of our deepest grief are eventually consecrated. The very dirt where you fell down weeping, the very ground where your false gods were ground to dust, becomes holy. The boundary of your rejection becomes the very site of your redemption. This prophetic promise changes everything about how we understand the Kidron. It is not just a graveyard. It is a territory waiting to be resurrected. And if the Valley of Ashes is destined to be declared holy to the Lord, then the moment the true king steps down into it, the prophecy begins to awaken. The history of the ravine, the weeping of David, the blood of the sacrifices, and the promise of Jeremiah all converge in one singular moment in time. Which brings us back to that Passover night, to the men walking in the dark. The upper room is now empty. The lingering scent of roasted lamb and spilled wine fades as the cold, sharp spring air of the Judean night takes over. Once again, we see a small group of men leaving the massive stone walls of Jerusalem behind, their sandals slipping on the steep, jagged path descending into the dark. At the bottom of the descent, they step into the deep trench of the Kidron Valley. We hear the distinct, rushing sound of water moving forcefully over unseen rocks in the night, to leave our false gods behind. When Jesus steps down into that darkness, listening to the murky water moving over the rocks. But when we look at this scene now, the landscape is no longer an empty background setting. It is alive with the immense weight of biblical history. Every step Jesus takes in the dirt is echoing with the past and securing the future. When Jesus steps down into that dark ravine, he is not just taking a quiet shortcut to a garden. He is the true and rightful Son of David, descending into the Kidron, the murky waters of profound mourning. Like his ancient ancestor, he is the anointed king, rejected by his own city, walking away with a sorrowful heart, preparing to face the devastating betrayal of a man who ate bread at his table. He is the ultimate reforming king, walking straight through the city's ancient graveyard. He is stepping over the pulverized ashes of centuries of false idols, preparing to deal the final death blow to the ultimate false gods of human rebellion and sin. And, most staggeringly, he is the true Lamb of God. As he listens to the water flowing in the dark, he knows it is running red with the blood of the temple sacrifices. He steps directly over the blood of the Old Covenant. He is not just taking a shortcut. He is fulfilling a centuries-old pattern. He is stepping into an ancient graveyard, walking willingly toward the cross to offer the final, permanent sacrifice that will end the bloodshed forever. Jesus did not cross the Kidron Valley merely to hide among the olive trees. He crossed it to conquer the darkness itself. He absorbed the rejection, the idolatry, the mourning, and the death that this deep trench represented, so that Jeremiah's ancient prophecy could finally awaken. This is not ultimately a story about a dark physical ravine on the edge of a biblical map. It is a story about the king who intentionally walked through our graveyard to bring us life. He took the ultimate boundary of exclusion, the place where broken things were thrown away, and by his own blood, he prepared the way for it to be declared holy to the Lord. That changes how you must view the terrifying valleys in your own life. When your human loyalties shatter, when your carefully constructed idols are dragged out and ground to dust, And when you are forced out of the safety of the city into the cold night, you are not abandoned. The ravine of your suffering is not a place of permanent exile. You are walking on sacred ground. You are stepping exactly where the Messiah has already walked. The water may sound violent in the dark. He is retracing the exact footsteps of a weeping, rejected king who fled for his life centuries earlier. And he is walking, and the stones may be sharp against your bare feet. But the valley is no longer just a place of death. Because Jesus crossed the Kidron, the dark boundary has become the very path to the resurrection. The true king has already conquered the shadows, and he will walk with you until the morning breaks. If this journey through the Kidron Valley helped you see the brilliant depth of Scripture and the beauty of Jesus more clearly, consider subscribing to the channel. Please share this study with someone who might be walking through their own dark ravine today. Thank you for watching. Into a valley that, on this specific Passover night, is carrying something horrifying in its waters. John makes sure we see Jesus crossing the Kidron because the Messiah could not have taken any other path. The physical landscape was preaching a sermon. Before Jesus ever opened his mouth in the garden, he had to cross the boundary to understand the profound weight of his footsteps on the night of his betrayal, and why this specific ravine was the only appropriate path for the Messiah to take. We must first look at the terrifying geography of the valley itself. Jerusalem is a fortress city, built on a mountain and protected by deep, natural trenches. If you stand on the eastern edge of the Temple Mount, their sandals slipping on steep, rocky pathways that dropped sharply away from the city. At the bottom of the descent, before they could reach, the ground does not gently roll away into soft hills. It vanishes. It drops hundreds of feet down a steep, jagged limestone cliff into a massive ravine. This is the Kidron Valley. It forms the absolute eastern boundary of ancient Jerusalem, creating a severe topographical divide. It separates the stone walls of the Holy City from the Mount of Olives and the sprawling, barren wilderness of Judea, stretching out toward the Dead Sea. For most of the year, the Kidron is a wadi, a dry, sun-baked riverbed choked with dust and loose rock. But during the heavy winter and early spring rains, water channels down the steep slopes. It creates a sudden, violent river that sweeps everything in its path out into the wasteland. Because of this severe, unforgiving geography, the Kidron was never a place of habitation. It was a place of removal. In the ancient world, the strict laws of ritual purity required that anything unclean had to be taken outside the camp, away from the holy presence of God. As Jerusalem grew into a massive capital, the Kidron Valley became its ultimate dumping ground. When the city needed to dispose of ritual waste, diseased material, or refuse, it went over the eastern wall and down into the ravine. More significantly, the valley served as the city's ancient necropolis. The steep eastern slopes rising up toward the Mount of Olives were cut with hundreds of rock-hewn tombs, the quiet olive trees waiting on the opposite hill. They had to cross a deep, narrow ravine. In the heavy darkness, generation after generation buried their dead in the limestone walls of the ravine. To walk through the Kidron was to walk through a massive, silent graveyard. This physical reality changes how we must view the eastern boundary of Jerusalem. The Kidron was not merely a topographical feature on a map. It was a profound theological line drawn in the dirt. It was the definitive border between the sacred and the profane, between the chosen and the excluded. Inside the walls stood the temple, the burning altar, the light, and the dwelling place of God. Outside the walls, down in the bottom of the ravine, lay the graves, the waste, and the darkness. To leave the city through the eastern gate and cross the Kidron Valley was to leave the safety of the living. It meant stepping into the domain of death. When an ancient Israelite looked down into that trench from the temple courts, they did not see a picturesque landscape. They saw the physical boundary of rejection. And this is exactly where Jesus deliberately leads his disciples in the middle of the night. He is not just taking a walk. He is actively leaving the holy city. He is crossing the boundary line into the place of the rejected, the unclean, and the dead. The physical darkness of this deep trench perfectly matches the spiritual reality of what happens there. They could hear the distinct sound of water moving forcefully over unseen stones. We know this story. It is the night of the Passover, but the terrifying geography is only the first layer of the story. In the ancient biblical world, a place is defined by what it is called. The physical shadows of the ravine are permanently etched into its very title. And the Hebrew name of the valley tells us even more about what happens to those who are forced to walk into its depths. In the biblical world, a name is never simply a geographic label. It is a destiny. A name reveals the hidden nature of a place and the events that are destined to happen there. When an English reader encounters the name Kidron, it sounds completely neutral. It reads like a simple map designation, no different than Oak Creek or Pine Valley. But when a first-century Hebrew speaker heard the word, they did not hear a neutral title. They heard a warning. The name Kidron comes from the Hebrew word Kidron, Kadajaron. It is derived from the ancient root verb kadar, kadara. The basic meaning of this root is to be dark, to be dusky, or to be murky. It was used in the ancient world to describe the sky when it became choked with heavy, black storm clouds that suddenly blocked out the sun. Jesus has just finished his final meal with his disciples. He has washed their feet, spoken his final promises. It was used to describe a river that was thick with mud, ash, and loose sediment, rendering the water completely undrinkable. The English translation is accurate in transliterating the name, but the original term carries a profound emotional weight that is easily lost in our modern Bibles. In ancient Hebrew culture, Kadar was not just a description of terrible weather or dirty water. It was the specific word used for the physical posture of intense grief. To be Kadar was to walk heavily in the dark, rough clothing of a mourner. It described a person whose face was literally darkened by sorrow, often covered in ash, completely overwhelmed by deep, paralyzing agony. When the psalmist cries out in Psalm 38 that he goes about mourning all day long, crushed by his burdens, he uses this exact same root word. It is the language of a shattered human heart. When the English Bible casually says the Kidron Valley, the ancient Hebrew ear hears something much heavier. They hear the ravine of the murky waters. They hear the valley of deep mourning. This means the valley was not just physically dark. Its very name linguistically embodies gloom and sorrow. The Kidron is the valley of shadows. To cross, it is to step into the darkest, most vulnerable moment of a human life, and is now leading them out of the city toward the Garden of Gethsemane. Most readers assume the path they take. It is the place where the brilliant light of the temple fades behind you, where the water runs thick with the sediment of the wasteland, and where you are forced to put on the heavy garments of a mourner. This changes how we read John's careful description of the Last Supper. When Jesus leaves the warmth and fellowship of the upper room, he does not just step outside into the night. He steps directly into the Kidron. He deliberately descends into the valley of deep mourning. We know from the other gospel accounts that as soon as Jesus crosses this physical boundary, his emotional state fractures. He tells his disciples that his soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. He is entering the darkness. The geography is perfectly mirroring his internal agony. The physical world and the spiritual reality are colliding in the dirt beneath his sandals. But this mournful name is not a coincidence. The Kidron did not merely earn its title from the muddy winter rains, nor was it named purely in anticipation of Jesus' final night. It earned its name from the blood and tears of history, centuries before Jesus ever walked down that steep limestone path. Another rightful king crossed this exact dark water. He, too, was surrounded by a small group of loyal followers. He, too, was walking away from the city in the middle of the night. Is merely a geographical necessity. It is simply the shortest route from the eastern gates of Jerusalem to the Mount of Olives. He, too, was weeping. And that first royal crossing established a pattern of betrayal that would haunt the throne of Israel, nearly 1,000 years before Jesus descended into the ravine. another anointed king, made the exact same agonizing walk. It is recorded in 2 Samuel 15. The nation has been torn apart by a sudden and violent rebellion. King David, the man after God's own heart, has been overthrown by his own son, Absalom. The conspiracy is massive and devastating. But the detail that cuts deepest is not the rebellion of the crowds. It is the betrayal of David's closest, most trusted advisor, Ahithophel. Ahithophel was the man who ate at David's table. His counsel was so highly regarded in Israel that the biblical text says listening to him was like inquiring of the word of God. When Ahithophel defects to the enemy, the throne is instantly lost. David is forced to abandon his palace and flee for his life. Step back and look at the architecture of the scene. The rightful king is rejected by his people. He is betrayed by his most intimate friend. He leaves the safety of Jerusalem, walking into the night with only a small remnant of loyal followers. When we read this passage, we treat the landscape as nothing more than a background, setting a quiet, unremarkable transition between the intimate drama. He leaves the Ark of the Covenant, the very presence of God, behind in the city, surrendering his crown and trusting only in divine mercy. And 2 Samuel 15:23 tells us exactly where he went. The whole countryside wept aloud as all the people passed by. The king also crossed the Kidron Valley, and all the people moved on toward the wilderness. David descends into the Valley of Shadows. The text describes his posture with devastating clarity. He walks up the slopes of the Mount of Olives weeping. His head is heavily covered. His feet are completely bare, exposed to the sharp, unforgiving limestone. This is the posture of a ruined man. It is the physical manifestation of Kedar, the absolute, murky darkness of the soul. The Kidron, therefore, is not just a geographic trench. It is the path of the rejected king. It is the valley where God's anointed goes when the city that should have welcomed him drives him out instead. Once this pattern becomes visible, the story of the Last Supper reads differently. When Jesus steps into the Kidron Valley, John expects us, if you have otters lashed trapped to the doo-doo, to hear the echoes of David's bare feet on the stones. The parallel is undeniable. Jesus is the true son of David. He is the ultimate, rightful king. He, too, has just been betrayed by a trusted companion who ate bread at his table.